Weather Channel. No place on Earth has better weather.
Okay, it is now 10 minutes before the hour. Time to get the very latest on the tropics. Well, we're in the peak of hurricane season, supposedly, across the Atlantic basin. And these areas are favored for development this time of year. Almost every area, the Gulf of Mexico, the Bay of Campeche, the Western Caribbean, the entire tropical Atlantic. The only area that's not too favored for development this time of year is the Eastern Caribbean. As in this area, over the last 100 years, we've only had about one tropical storm to develop, so that is logical to think that this area is not necessarily conducive or favorable for tropical development. But look at all the other areas. Now, each of these dots represents tropical storm or hurricane formation and their origination. So we talk about quite an expansive area. Let's see what's going on right now. We have been watching a couple of systems. Notice this large cluster of showers and storms east of the Lesser Antilles, almost midway between the islands and the West African coast. We've been watching another area of concentrated thunderstorms too. And this one, well, it's just churning the waters here. Not an organized tropical system at all. As a matter of fact, it's moving off toward the northeast, and it'll continue to do so as we watch our next little trough come off the east coast, and it's going to push this system on off toward the east. So let's zoom in on several areas. You can see the thunderstorms are moving away from the east coast of Florida and the northern Bahamas. But this area is still of concern because if you remember now, based on climatology, this area is pretty favored for tropical development this time of year, the Western Caribbean. And we do have a pretty large area of convection here near the Yucatan Peninsula. This is the Yucatan Peninsula, territory of Mexico. And we've been watching upper air winds get lighter. And once we see an anticyclonic flow build aloft, we know that things are becoming even more favorable for development. We'll keep watching this. But of course, on the other side of Mexico, we have Hurricane Nora. I'll talk more about that in a moment. But the effects from Nora is perhaps feeding into the system too, and that may inhibit it from developing anymore. We will keep you posted on this system. Notice how quiet it is now over the Eastern Caribbean, but just east of the islands, we do have our next tropical wave. This is Puerto Rico, by the way, the U.S., the British Virgin Islands, and then all of the islands that make up the Lesser Antilles. And you can see this pretty good cluster. It's holding together pretty good, even beginning to see maybe a little twist to it here. Now, upper air winds have been strong, but they seem to be weakening a bit. So this system definitely bears watching. We can't discount it too much. We have been watching this trough to the north, and it may inhibit the system a little bit too, but definitely something we'll watch for you. As it continues to move west, though, keep in mind that it will perhaps move into an area that is not too favored for development this time of year, and that's the Eastern Caribbean. A little farther east across the coastal areas here of Africa, and we do have a couple of waves coming off the coast, but notice how they are just totally dissipating, losing all of its convection, so really not too much to talk about here. A little farther out across the Atlantic basin. So all in all, nothing organized in the Atlantic. But in the East Pacific, you know, El Nino has been a big factor, warmer Pacific waters than usual, and we've had one storm after another. Hurricane Nora, winds up to 105 miles an hour. It is expected to become perhaps a major hurricane before all said and done, with winds up to 115 miles an hour. It's nearly stationary, hasn't been moving much. We've had some little wobble to the northwest and maybe west to northwest. And the long-range forecast does pretty much forecast this system to continue moving west as we go through time. So within the next 72 hours, it should perhaps get a little closer to the southern tip of Baja California, which is right here. But for now, coastal flood warnings are in effect right along the coastal areas of Mexico. Now let's keep going west across the Pacific, and we'll show you David. It's been downgraded.
Weather Channel. No place on Earth has better weather.
Well, Hurricane Nora continues to churn up the eastern Pacific. We'll see if the hurricane has strengthened any in the last few hours as we have some brand new updated information for you. First of all, let's take a look at the climatologically favored areas here in the second half of September, what typically is a fairly active month in the tropics. As you know, the peak of the season, usually around the 10th or the 11th of September. Late September can be stormy with the hot spots including the Gulf, Western Caribbean, and the Atlantic from just east of the Florida East Coast all the way to the south of the Cape Verde Islands. 110 years worth of storms right here, 103 all put together only in the September 11th through 20th time span. In about 9 days in the 110-year time period, 103 separate tropical storms or hurricanes have developed. Today on the Atlantic side, no tropical storms, no hurricanes. Pacific side, we do have Hurricane Nora right here. Back on the Atlantic side, a few interesting locations we're watching closely for you. One off the east coast of the U.S. Even if something develops here, however, southwest winds aloft should take it out to sea. The next area we're watching, Western Caribbean, with quite a flare-up of thunderstorm activity right here, which may be being enhanced somewhat by the upper low. You may be able to see that spinning over the Bay of Campeche or the southwest Gulf of Mexico. East of the upper low, there's a little bit of ridging, but on the other hand, there hasn't been any fall in pressure and no low-level circulation is denoted. So although it's interesting to watch, right now it does not look like there's any sign of organization. In the future, perhaps we'll keep an eye on it for you. Down the road 72 hours, a northwesterly flow aloft may develop. That would hinder development as well. The islands today, a few scattered thunderstorms. East of the islands by 500 miles, a tropical wave. But again, winds aloft remain a bit strong for this system to develop at this time. Should say again, though, if the winds lighten up a bit, as some of our computer charts are forecasting this weekend, closer to the islands, and this wave continues its drift towards the west, then there is the slight potential there could be some further organization. Right now, no threat to the islands. Eastern Atlantic, very, very tranquil. Eastern Pacific, though, still very active. Hurricane Nora, nothing like Hurricane Linda, but still a powerful hurricane. 100 mile per hour sustained maximum winds, 14.4 north, 104.1 west. That puts the center about 330 miles south of Manzanillo, Mexico. Here's your enhanced satellite picture. The eye's been ragged. Looks like it's closing in a little bit now, but the latest update indicates that there probably will not be any really significant intensification over the next 24 hours. One of the reasons may be that, if you remember, Linda was in this general area, and there's been some upwelled, the water's upwelled out of the deeper depths of the ocean, if you will, and the surface water temperatures here are slightly cooler than they typically would be. That may cause Nora to just kind of maintain its strength over the next 24 hours rather than developing very, very quickly. Other than the slightly cooler than average sea surface readings, outflow remains excellent, so we'll watch Nora closely as it drifts off towards the northwest. By the way, the long-range track of Nora is a bit uncertain at this time, and it's possible that some of the moisture may be drawn up towards the southwestern United States. That's one possible scenario we'll be watching for you. The swells coming out, the high waves battering the Mexican coast. For that reason, a coastal flood warning from Punta Maldonado to Cabo Corrientes on the Mexican shoreline. Other than Nora, Pacific is quiet. Hawaiian Islands in good shape. We have David, the remnants of it, becoming quickly extratropical as it races up on the jet stream winds towards the Alaskan Aleutian Islands. Back in the States, a warm, hazy day in the east. But as we head west to the Mississippi, the coolest air mass in a long time, surging south.
Weather Channel. No place on Earth has better weather.
Well, we are 2/3 of the way through this quiet September in the tropics. I say quiet because so far we just had one named storms, and we don't really see anything here if you live in the mainland United States anyway to coming up to the tropics that might threaten your weekend. Now down in the Caribbean, we are seeing quite a concentration of clouds and showers. And as we look at our upper airflow, we have high pressure has built there, and we have a low off in the southwestern part of the Gulf in the Bay of Campeche. That kind of a flow over the Caribbean normally we would think might lend itself to some development. But as we look at that today, we're not really seeing anything at all in the way of a surface circulation developing. We can't identify any kind of a low. Out here near Bermuda, we have on that old frontal boundary some showers. This system has gotten a little bit better organized, but that's moving all toward the east pretty fast. And down here, 400 or 500 miles east of the Lesser Antilles, we've had this disturbed weather in the tropics. It's been very, very persistent, in spite of the fact that we've had an upper flow which seems to be kind of hostile. I say hostile because pretty good westerly winds. However, as this gets farther west over the weekend, we are developing a bit of a high pressure ridge there. So that could be something we'd have to deal with rather later. It's not moving very fast, so nothing right away. And I would point out to you that out here in the eastern Atlantic Ocean, we have westerly winds now all the way over to the coast of Africa. So it looks as if any Cape Verde type storms that would develop over that far east would have a tough time to get going. We can't quite declare the Cape Verde season over yet, but it may well be nearing the point where we can say that. Now, to review these systems again, we're watching the Caribbean. There's a system up near Bermuda, and there is a system moving in toward the islands. We'll look first up toward Bermuda, where they've had some showers and some gusty winds today, but we don't think this is going to be a tropical system as it scoots on out toward the northeast. So now we'll take you down in the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico, and we'll show you this. This is an upper low. You can see that counterclockwise circulation in the western Gulf. And then in the Caribbean, here we have a very large, massive area of showers and possibly thunder showers. We'll focus in on that just a little bit. But even though it does cover a big area and some of these showers are pretty heavy, we're not able to tell you at this time or to see any real organization get started. So this is something that we'll need to watch over the weekend because it is so close to the United States and western Cuba and the Yucatan Peninsula as well. But so far, nothing appears to be organizing there that we can detect anyway. Now, this is this system we mentioned. It's 300 or 400 miles north, or east of the Lesser Antilles, rather, east of the Caribbean Sea. And quite a concentration of showers there too, but again, no circulation we can identify, and we do have these westerly winds, but again, they are forecast to lessen some over the weekend, so we'll see what happens in the next day or two. That might be something that folks would want to keep a little bit of a close eye on. Now, out here in the eastern Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, very low latitudes, we have basically down on the intertropical convergence zone, we have some showers, but no development expected from that quarter. Nora. Yesterday we were saying that this might be on its way toward being what we call a major hurricane with top winds over 110 miles an hour, but it has lessened a little bit. The winds are down to 100 miles an hour, and the key thing that's going on here is that it's been just about stationary for the better part of 2 days, centered 320 miles to the south of Manzanillo. And because it has been stationary, it's been rotating right over this same area, and we believe that what happens here when one is stationary like that, eventually you start to get some upwelling of cooler water, and that might inhibit the development just a little bit. But as it resumes the path to the northwest, which we think it will, it'll be moving away from that cooler water, and then it will have an opportunity to go ahead and strengthen again. Nothing out here in the Central Pacific or on the Hawaiian Islands of any concern at all. And now David out here in the Western Pacific is moving towards the northeast out over the open waters of the Atlantic. It's moving about 40 miles an hour. Top wind still 70, but it is moving out over the open water.
The Weather Channel. No place on Earth has better weather.
Well, it's 50 past the hour, and it's time for that tropical update. Now, we have one system in the eastern Pacific, and we also have a departing system in the western Pacific. But good news for the Atlantic, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Caribbean. Let's take a look. Upper level winds, we look to the upper level winds to find out if there's any shearing over our systems, and also to see if there's a ridge. Now we do look for a trough and a ridge. And the reason we look for those is because tropical systems, for them to develop, they need a ridge or an anticyclone, a high pressure aloft. They do not like, or they cannot develop when we have a trough or an upper level low. So that's why it's very important to have this feature. But we can tell the wind flow in the upper levels by looking at the high clouds and the way they're moving. We also get a lot of data in from satellite and also from pilots report what the winds are doing up there in the upper levels. So we look and see this trough here. We do see a system here underneath our ridge, but the winds are still a little bit strong here from the southwest. Now the forecast is for the winds to let up a little bit. So we'll keep an eye in this area for you. It's east of Bermuda at this time. Actually not too bad of conditions right now in Bermuda. And in the southern Gulf of Mexico, an upper level low, so we're not too concerned with that area. But we do see a ridge here over the Caribbean, the Western Caribbean, the Northwestern Caribbean, and that's an area of possible concern. Although over time, the next day or so, conditions will be less favorable for development. We have not seen any kind of low-level circulation at the surface, so that's good news. We do have a couple of waves coming in here from the Atlantic, but you notice the westerly winds aloft. And when I talked about shear earlier, that was another feature we look for here. The westerly winds, definitely not good to try to get a tropical system to develop. Now the westerly winds have been pretty strong actually in the Atlantic, and it may be due directly to our El Nino. Now, this area, we did have some convection earlier that was of some interest, but really has fallen apart. No low-level circulation and no organization to the thunderstorms. Just some thunderstorms in Cuba tonight and possibly in the Dominican Republic and Haiti tomorrow afternoon. Closer inspection showing even thunderstorms in the Yucatan and Isle of Youth. Looks like all the thunderstorms are off to your south and east at this time. Now this wave coming, this is, let me put in perspective here, South America. Here's the Windward Islands. This wave heading westward, but it's getting sheared from the northwest, from the southwest. We're getting northeasterly winds here. So we're not too concerned with this area. It has held together pretty well, though, as it's come across the Atlantic, but definitely not conducive in the upper levels. Same with these waves coming off of Africa. Now, Hurricane Nora, a different story. Upper levels looking good here, but what's happened is Nora's been pretty stationary, and it's been churning up the water, bringing the cooler water up. Hurricanes do not like cooler water, so actually we've seen the intensity come down a little bit here with Hurricane Nora, but it has started to move slightly off towards the northwest. So we look over the next couple of days of some slow increase in intensity, some slow strengthening, but it's going to take a while. But because of the swells and the waves, we have coastal flood warnings in effect from Cabo Corrientes to Punta Maldonado, and these continue through the evening, and we could actually see, we probably are seeing some of the rain now moving in, some of the rain bands. We're looking at some heavy rainfall, and watch out for the flash flooding and also for the mudslides in that area. Otherwise, pretty quiet for the Pacific. Believe it or not, we've gotten to the end storm already, but we're not seeing anything organized here. Now, this is another area that's been pretty active this summer, and actually it's pretty quiet right now. Maybe something to keep an eye on, maybe with this area of convection. But what's left of Tropical Storm David moving off towards the northeast very quickly and should become extratropical here in the next 12 to 24 hours. Coming up next, a look at the severe weather.